Tonight we're doing the last melacha of the Lametet Melachot, even though B'ezrat Hashem will be doing a couple more weeks of additional Isurim Midrabanan, prohibitions that were decreed by the rabbis. But this is the last one, and this is the most complex one of all the melachot, of all the 39 melachot, the 39 categories of certain functions that are prohibited on Shabbat. Hotza'ah. And it's going to take us 2 to 3 weeks to cover Hotza'ah, because I'll be talking a little bit about Eruv, which is very relevant today. They're thinking about making an Eruv. There's various types of Eruvim. This is complex. The most difficult part, perhaps in Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim. Orach Chaim is part of the Shulchan Aruch for those with our daily activity. And many people don't learn this part of the Shulchan Aruch or Mishkan Berurah because it's very complex, many details. And nevertheless, it's one of the most important ones. One needs to know how he can carry. There's various types of premises that we will see that are shuyot. There's quite a bit of details. Two neighbors that want to join together, join their homes, join their backyards, how they can. So it will take us at least one more week to cover, perhaps a 2 editions. No, the Mechaber, the Bet Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo put it together. There is a lot of discussion of this in the Gemarot as well. I'm going to go slow. In Hotza'ah, what we're dealing with is something that was common in the Mishkan, just like the other Lametet Melachot. That was the Iruk. When they used to disassemble the Mishkan and take it from place to place when it's in the desert, there was a need to remove it, to take it. The removing and the taking, the transferring over from place to place, from carriage to carriage. They were very heavy. They did just carry it over onto agalot, wagons. So this was what took place in the Mishkan. And as we know, that all the melachot that took place in the Mishkan are prohibited, including Hotza'ah. But in Hotza'ah we have 2 types. There is one called Mireshut Mireshut, from one premise to another premise, from a house, for example. And there is another concept in Hotza'ah called Ha'avara. Let's say you are in this, taking it more than Daled Amot, walking with something in your pocket for more, a distance greater than 4 Amot. 4 Amot is approximately 7 to 8 feet, 6 to 8 feet. That's a different type of Hotza'ah. That's called Ha'avara. Taking it in the same premise, but from one point A to point B. These 2 are asur, even though some say the Ha'avara and the Reshut Rabim is halacha leMoshe Sinai. It is not in the Torah. It is not something that was necessarily clearly stated, but it is learned out in the same way it is just as asur as the other one. So that's what's involved in Hotza'ah, in this melachah. But in order that we should not be confused, I wrote over here that any type of Hotza'ah is asur, meaning whether you throw it, whether you roll it, whether you kick it, whether you push it, whether you drag it, or whether you carry it. All these functions, all these forms of carrying something, an object, from one reshut to another, would asur, regardless of how you accomplish. Alright, so before we get into the details, we need to explain. Alright, the most important one that we need to be aware of is Reshut Rabim. That is a public domain in English. We're familiar with Reshut Rabim because we speak about the street. But the street may not be necessarily a Reshut Rabim. Reshut Rabim is a public domain, and one is not allowed to carry from a private domain, from one's home, to a public domain. So one needs to know, one needs to recognize what a Reshut Rabim is. So this is the basic description of what Reshut Rabim is. It has to be 16 amot wide, or approximately 30 give or take. Not covered, there's no roof, not covered. It has to be mefulash, in other words, that section, the Reshut Rabim, has to be mefulash, meaning that it goes through. It's not blocked at any point. It's the process from point A to point B, which traverses without any obstacles, any walls, or any. In other words, it's completely mefulash. In other words, there's nothing in the way, blocking, obstructing. Another description is brought down in the Gemara is Stratya Uflatya. Stratya Uflatya means, Stratya is like a big highway, it's like a freeway. A Flatya is a big square. Anybody that has been to certain Latin American cities, perhaps also in Europe, will know what a Flatya is. A Flatya is a big square where you can have thousands and thousands of. In Mexico, there's a place called the Zocalo. Tremendous large area where you can have thousands and thousands of a big square. You see that in America, but maybe in Washington City there might be a tremendous big square, even though it's not a highway, a tremendous large area where you can have thousands and thousands assembled there. That's called a Flatya. Another description over the Reshut Rabim. Another condition is Rabim Bokimbo. You have to have that. It must be an area where many people go through it every day. And according to some, not according to everybody, but according to some opinions, the amount of people that reside or use that area is at least 600,000 at any given time. It's a little vague. There's different opinions about that too, about what you just asked, every day at one time, going through it or being there. But we take it to mean at any given time in that whole general area, there happens 100,000. This last condition is critical because it can make a big difference. A city is called a Reshut Harabim or not. It's a small town, and you hold by this condition, and there's no 600,000 people in that town, then that town is not a Reshut Harabim. That's going to make a big difference. According to the Torah, there's only two premises, Reshut HaYachid and Reshut Harabim. A private domain, like one's home, and a public place. So you're going to see the Rabbanan added two more. So according to the Torah, you either have a Reshut Harabim or Reshut HaYachid. So it's important for us to know what something is. If we hold that it's something that does not have 600,000 is not a Reshut Harabim, then according to the Torah, we might as well call it a Reshut HaYachid. This is very important, especially when we talk about Eruvim, how to make an Eruv. Do we need the 600,000 or not? The Sephardim go by the opinion that you don't need 600 for something to be called a Reshut. Many go by this. We don't need 600,000. You could have a Reshut Harabim without that criteria. As long as, of course, it's in Amot White, it's not covered, it's Mefulash, you have many people go through it and use it, and so forth. The other premise is called a Reshut HaYachid, private domain. Private domain does not have to be very large. I put down the minimal measurement. It has to be at least 4 by 4. A tefach is the size of a fist, approximately about close to 4 inches, right, from bottom to top. So 16 inches, 4 by 4, it has to be in both directions, 4 tefachim, by a height of 10 tefachim, which is approximately 36 to 40 inches. So any object, it doesn't have to be a house then, right? It's small. Any object, street somewhere, that fits this dimension, considered a Reshut HaYachid. Why is this important? Because we want to know if we can put something from the street on top of it. Right? We're not. What did we say before? We're not allowed to take from one Reshut to another Reshut. That's called Hotza'ah, and the other one is called Avra. Even in the Reshut Harabim itself, we cannot take something from point A to point B if that distance is greater than Dalad Amot, approximately 6 to 8 feet. So you have Hotza'ah and Ha'avara. So Reshut HaYachid, if it has these dimensions, then it may be a Reshut HaYachid. But another important condition to keep in mind is something called Mechitzot. We'll talk about a little bit later on. Usually a Reshut HaYachid has real mechitzot. It has partitions. Like a house, it has walls. The walls have certain dimensions, and the perimeter has a certain dimension. Right? If it's at least 4 by 4 by the height of 10, and it has mechitzot, that's called a Reshut. The street will be a Reshut Harabim if it has all those conditions. We learned it out from Midbar. When Amisai was in the Midbar, what the measurements were, what the Torah considered a Reshut Harabim, and we apply that to today. We don't live in the desert, we have those conditions. There's a certain amount of people. According to those who go by the 60,000, right, and it's not covered, then it's a real Reshut Harabim. You cannot carry more than Daled Amot, right? Then it won't be called a Reshut Harabim. It's going to call something else, and we'll get to it, and I'll explain what that is. Right? This is Minat Torah. According to the Torah, you only have 2 Reshuyot, but in the Rabbanan, you have 2 additional types of Reshuyot, and that's where we're going now. It's Carmelit and Makom Patur. Those are the 2 Reshuyot that the Rabbanan added. Carmelit is not a Reshut Harabim, and it's not a Reshut HaYachid. Neither. Something in between. The rabbi said, since it resembles a Reshut, we cannot carry in it, or into it, or from it. In other words, we cannot carry into it from our home, or we cannot carry from it into our home. Neither can we carry in it, from point A to point B, more than Daled Amot. What's the dimensions of a Carmelit? At least 4 by 4, but the height is less than, we're going to see later on why it makes a difference. So right now, all we know is that if something is 4 by 4 and it's higher than 10, then it would be a Reshut HaYachid. Obviously, a Carmelit lacks one of the conditions of a Reshut HaYachid, and that is does not have high mechitzot. Either it is not as high, or it has no mechitzot whatsoever, and it's an area like a lake or a street that does not have a lot of people go through it, or it's wide, an alley. All of that will be called Carmelit. Many of our streets are at least a Carmelit, maybe a Reshut Harabim, because they open up into a Reshut. But there are at least a Carmelit. A Carmelit, because it resembles a Reshut Harabim. It looks like it, but missing some of the conditions. But since it resembles, Chachamenu asru letaltel, to carry in a Carmelit. That is why we can't carry, no matter how large the town is. The town is a Carmelit. So you cannot carry from your house into the street, or the house, or in the street itself, even if that street is not, at least in the Rabbanan. No matter where you are in the world, on Shabbat, you would not be able to carry outside. Even if you are in the woods, in the forest. There are no people. There's not even at least a Carmelit. A Carmelit is a Rabbanan to carry into it, from it, or from point A to point B. Carmelit זה לא זה וזה לא זה. לא, זה משהו אחר. שזה לא זה וזה לא זה. לא, זה לא ניוטרל. יש בזה כמה הסברים. אני אגיד לך אחר כך, כן. זה לא כל כך חשוב, בגלל כל אחד מציע משהו אחר. מאיפה נובע המקור, מה הלשון הזה, נכון? שאלה, שואלים, מדברים על זה, אבל זה לא כל כך בטוח, אז יש כמה הצעות, כמה אפשריות. יש אומרים שזה קר, נל, אני אגיד לך, לא, זה לא קר. אז יש בזה כמה הסברים. There's several explanations where the word comes from. No, there's several explanations where the word comes from, but that's not important for now. It means, it's a word that is meant to designate something which is neither this, we have the Reshut HaRabim and Reshut HaYachid are min Torah, and the Rabbanan added these two, Carmelit and Makom Ketur, which I'll explain now. Carmelit is one that resembles the Reshut HaRabim, because of that it's asur with the Rabbanan to carry it, and the dimensions of it has to be at least 4 by 4, but the height is less than 10. You could have a platform outside of it that is high, let's say a few inches high, 14 inches high, 14 inches high, and at least 4 by 4. That would be a Carmelit. So even though the street was a Reshut HaRabim, that may be a Carmelit, depending used by the public or not, and that platform is a separate Reshut in itself, and it's different than the Reshut HaRabim because of the dimension. It doesn't have to have Nehitot. You could also have rivers, lakes, and oceans, or you can have a platform. Right? Anything which is very, very low, is less than Fahim, then it's already part of this. You could have something above the ground, sticking up. No. So for it to become it has to have the dimensions at least 4 by 4. It has to, and then it has to have height, because if it does not have height, if it's not above the ground, if it's very low, so it might as well be the street, right? We say it's like the street, the batel, right? Not something by itself. How does it stand out if it's at least 3 tefachim high? It's 4 by 4, but it cannot be higher than 10. Once it's higher than 10, then it might be a Reshut HaYachid if it has a Mechitsot, or it might be a Makom Patur. But it's not a Carmelit, right? So if it has no Mechitsot whatsoever, the typical example is a river, a lake. I wrote a typical examples of what Carmelit. There's various. We'll get to those examples later. Makom Patur is just the opposite than a Carmelit. It does not have the 4 by 4. But it does have the height, okay? It does not have the 4 by 4, but it has the height. And that height has to be at least 3, around 3 plus. Otherwise, again, it's just like the street surface. So these are the 4 Reshuyot, Reshut HaRabim, Reshut HaYachid, Carmelit, and Makom Ketur. The one that's the most interesting one, unique, is Makom Ketur. And I'm going to get to examples. The main thing you have to remember at this point is that a Makom Ketur, a place where one can put things on it. You happen to be in your pocket, right? We'll talk about that next week. What happened next week? We'll get into the details. What happens if something? Oh no, you have a tissue in your pocket. You're carrying some money. There's a difference if it's money or if someone is not. Right? Depends where you are. What do? Do you just throw it? You put it down somewhere? Do you go back home? Do you continue? Right? That we'll talk about next. Okay? So that once I don't want to confuse it too much. Once you understand the various reshuyot, it will be easier to absorb the rest. Yes. Tissue come כאן. אסור לצלצל מפחד. מה פתאום? למה שלא נשמע מפחד? רק יותר דקה. נייר. לא משנה, לכתחילה לפחות אסור. נכון? זה דבר קטן מאוד, אבל הוא שימושי. לכן הוא אסור. אתה מחשיב אותו. נכון? נכון? Alright? So what's a makom patur? Anything which is missing the 4 by 4, but it's at least 3 or higher. And we'll get to the examples later on. Alright. What would be a typical example of a hotza'ah from one reshut to another reshut? So I put down several. Let's say the post office dropped off some letters that did not fit in. And you put them outside, right? Now, if you're outside, if the step outside of your house is not a Reshut HaYachid, remember what I said, if it's not a Reshut HaYachid, then it's most likely either a Carmelit or a Reshut HaRabim. You cannot take it into your house. It's very possible, and we'll talk about that next week too, depending how your porch is constructed, right? If you have a porch, that it just may be that outside your doorstep is not a Reshut HaRabim. It's not part of it's not called, it's not a street. It could be a Matur, it could be a Carmelit, it could be also a Reshut HaYachid. So we have to try to understand or figure out what this outside area is in order to know if we can bring it in. But if we see that it's a Reshut HaRabim, then you would not be able to bring it inside, whether it's the newspaper or the mail. You know, they throw newspapers, coupons, all this stuff. Yeah. So anything like that, that would be a typical example of hotza'ah. In this case, it's hachnasa. You're taking it inside. Or putting it outside, it would be the same thing. You don't touch it on Shabbat. You can't bring it into the house on Shabbat if it's outside of it. We can either take it out from the house to the street or take something into the house. Unless that area where those items are, those objects, that mail, similar to the house, belongs to them. For that, I need to describe to you the porch, depending on how the porch is built. It may be considered a Reshut HaYachid. Now, you can ask me later. Alright, another example is the pach hashpa. You have garbage you want to take out. You can't take it out. If your garbage is full, you want to take it out. You take it out into your backyard. Hopefully your backyard is enclosed. And if it is, there's no problem. But you cannot take out the garbage in the street. These are just a few examples that we are familiar with. that describe what hotza'ah is. Yeah, Yeah, I'm going to get to that. Then there is ha'avara. An example of ha'avara is taking a mitpachat with you, a handkerchief, or agala, the pushing a baby carriage. We're not taking it from the house necessarily to the street. It might be already outside. It may be there. You cannot take it from point A to point B. All of this, of course, if there's no eruv, a good eruv. Once it makes a good, a kosher eruv, you would be able to carry. So all of this we are assuming, obviously, when there's no eruv. That is the whole idea of making an eruv. An eruv, it depends which eruv we're talking about. I can't give you a speech right now about any particular eruv, but if you have a kosher eruv, that it was done properly, which basically takes this town, converts the Reshut HaRabim into a Reshut HaYachid, taking a public domain and converting it into a private domain. The best eruv, obviously, is when you put real walls, like the old city in Yerushalayim. You don't have strings, you don't have anything else other than real mechitzot, real partitions, real walls. You are enclosing the whole area. There are other ways to enclose an area without this partition, but they're more problematic. You have to rely on certain leniency. Right. So therefore, depending on the circumstances, depending on the size of the town, depending what kind of, right, some eruvim might be better than others, more reliable than others. Yeah. Eruv means to unite, le'aref, to mix, to unite, to put together. We're taking up this large area, which is the Reshut HaRabim, and making it one by encircling it somehow. Somehow we're encircling it, we're making it a private domain, and we're going to treat it just like our home. So if the whole town becomes one unit, one home, you can carry it. Like in Israel in some places, or even in New York, certain communities that are small, they have an eruv or something else. Yeah, right. But all of this is assuming that there is no eruv. Once you have an eruv, then obviously most of it shayah, not applicable. But it's still important to know because we want to know how to make the eruv. Can you make it? You can't always. It's not always possible. All right. Anything that is less than daled amot in Reshut HaRabim. We spoke about ha'avara, that we cannot carry in Reshut HaRabim more than daled amot. What about less? Right? The prohibition against carrying from point A to point B was daled amot and more, right? More than that amount. What if it's less than that? There's no problem. When would you want to carry less than that? Why would you? Well, one example I'm going to give you next week, and the one next week is more complex. Let's say your button falls off, a very expensive button, right? It fell here, and you want to pick it up after Shabbat. You don't want it to lie down over Shabbat, so you want to push it a little bit to the side. Pushing it a little bit to the side, less than daled amot, mutar. You hear that? That would be an example, a simple example of less than daled amot where you may want to contemplate doing it. Yeah, definitely, it's better that, because it's still common. That would be in a situation where you would want to and you would be allowed to move it over, as long as you don't push it too far. That's okay. Alright, another arba amot. Then shesh l'shmona katotet. Katotet. Okay. There's differences of opinion on how much an amah is. It ranges between 24 and 1 amah. Later we'll try to convert it. Okay. Another issue which is also midrabanan is ha'avara mi Reshut HaYachid to Reshut HaYachid derech Reshut HaRabim. Also another example of explaining it, but the concept is important. And that is taking it from one house to another house, but going through a public place. So what did you do? You didn't really do anything because you didn't stop. You went straight from one house to another house. You didn't put it down in the street. You didn't do hotza'ah, Reshut leReshut, in a sense. You did it to another Reshut, but it's the same Reshut as yours. It's just a different home, a different address, right? You took it from your house to your friend's house and didn't stop in. You brought him something. You brought him sidurim, you brought him wine, That's assuming midrabanan. That's not assuming. You can't do it if you're going through the street. You cannot do it, but it's midrabanan. That's not called the hotza'ah mamash because you didn't stop and put it down in Reshut HaRabim. You went from one house to another house through a street, right? That's called ha'avara mi Reshut HaYachid Reshut HaYachid derech Reshut HaRabim. That's assuming midrabanan. That's all. These are the basic concepts that we need to know for today. Now we're going to go into the various examples of each one. So what? Of course. No, you can't carry food from one house to another house if you have to go through a public room. What? No, you can't carry. I gave another example which is prohibited by rabbinic decree, not according to the Torah. And that is taking something from one house, to another house, but you're going through a street. Right. So what happened? You did not transgress any prohibition according to the Torah because you did not place this item in the street. Right? You did not place this item in the Reshut HaRabim. You went from one house to another house. Reshut HaYachid to Reshut HaYachid. Without stopping in between. Carrying. We're talking about carrying something. No, you cannot do that. Right. You cannot do that. Even though you did not place it in the street, which is a typical example of hotza'ah, this is assumed midrabanan. It's another example of a prohibition that is assumed midrabanan. Now that we understand a little bit about the four premises, we need to get into a little bit more detail and some examples of the various reshuyot. The first thing we need to know about Reshut HaYachid, about the Mechitzot. When we talk about Mechitzot, there's three conditions of what makes Mechitza and Mechitza. It's important in the Psukkah as well. Because a Mechitza has to be that it can stand. If the wind can blow it, it's not a real Mechitza. Let's say you're in the country. Why is it important? Because let's say you're in a bungalow town, or in the country, in the desert, and you want to be able to carry. You have an RV, right? And you're going to an RV camp. You want to make yourself an eruv. You want to make yourself that it have 4 partitions, not 3. Some say 3 is enough too. Some say 4. Regardless, today everybody agrees that at least midrabanan, you need 3 plus a tikkun on the 4th side. A tikkun means that you have to set up something, which I'll explain another time, that is in place of the 4th wall. It does not have to be a complete 4th wall, but there has to be something there in place of the 4th wall. No, I'm with you. We'll talk about that. Regardless, you have to have 4. If you have 3, you need something on the 4th side. That is the number of mechitzot. The height we already spoke about, that it has to be 10. I'm skipping down to over here, up there. It has to stand. It has to be a good, strong wall, be able to stand by a normal wind, and it has to come down at least within 3 tefachim of the floor. In other words, let's say you have a mechitza coming down, but it does not go all the way to the floor. It doesn't touch the floor. You completely enclose an area with walls. There's beams holding them, obviously, something holding them, but the wall is not all the way to the floor. It doesn't reach the floor. That's okay, as long as it goes down to 3 tefachim. In other words, there's not more than 3 tefachim left, because then we call it lavud. Lavud means that if there's only 12 inches or so left to the ground, it is considered as though the wall is going down to the floor. That little space, that little area beneath the wall, is insignificant. So we have strong partitions. We want to have 3 plus a tikkun, or 4 partitions. We want to have them 10 tefachim high, and they have to be strong mechitzot. That's what makes mechitzot of a Reshut HaYachid. If you want to build something, if you want to be able to carry somewhere, you have these good mechitzot, there is no problem. A typical example of Reshut HaYachid is a building, a car. If you're in a car, you're on Shabbat, you're in a Reshut HaYachid. A large garbage can, a small one, you may have a large, those bins, that's a Reshut HaYachid. You don't live in there, right? You don't work there. But why is this important for us to know that it's a Reshut HaYachid? Because you can't throw something in there from the street. Because the street is a Reshut HaRabim. So if you want to pick something up, you can't put it into the garbage bin. You cannot, because that's a Reshut HaYachid, and this is a Reshut HaRabim. So you see how you may have a garbage bin in the street, but if it has certain dimensions, then it's a separate Reshut by itself, and if for some reason you want to take something and put it inside, you cannot, because you're taking it from one Reshut to another. In this case, Reshut HaRabim to Reshut HaYachid. So a large garbage bin would be another example. Telephone booth is a Reshut HaYachid. It's not as large as your house, but it's its own reshut. Yeah, I said a large one. As long as it meets the conditions, right? It has the height and it has the dimensions, so it has to be large. So depending on the various sizes, we have to measure it. Does it have the dimensions or not? The one from the city, I don't think, but I have to measure it. Maybe it is. I don't know. Right, at least. No, for it to be a Reshut HaYachid, yes, 4 by 10 or more. Right. If you drop one. If you're inside, you can. If you have something in there, you can carry inside, but you cannot carry from the booth to the outside of the or from the street. It's a separate reshut. Let's say you see something on the floor in the street, you can't take it and put it in. You see the telephone book directory, somebody left it outside. You just can't put it in. It's a separate reshut. All right. Another example of Reshut HaYachid that you may not have thought of is a windowsill. A windowsill. Outside your window, sometimes there's an area where you can put a flower pot, right, or something else. The rabbis said that this area, if it serves the house. You can open the window and put something there. You can put something there and take something from there into the house as long as that item is breakable. Breakable. Listen to this. It's very interesting. Yes. Why breakable? In other words, if it falls, it will break. Then you're allowed to put something there or take something from there into the house. Because if it's not breakable, the Chachamim were concerned. Look how the Chachamim were concerned about every detail. If it's not breakable, it may fall outside and you may go out and pick it up. It's said if it's breakable, you'll just leave it alone. So if it's a windowsill and it serves the Reshut HaYachid, it's part of the Reshut HaYachid. So if you're outside, you can't pick up something from it and put it on that windowsill. But if it's something that's called a ziz or zistra, is a stone that sticks out, that's not intended for the use. It's just something that sticks out. It's part of the house, but it's sticking out into the street. That would not be called Reshut HaYachid. It's going to be called something else. But it's not a Reshut HaYachid. But if it serves the house, you open the window, usually take things in and out, then that would be called a Reshut HaYachid. As long as you only put breakable things. So that's called Horei Reshut HaYachid. It's a class in itself. Horei means the holes, niches, nooks of Reshut HaYachid. They may be part of the Reshut HaYachid. Alright, Makom Petur. Actually, before we go to Makom Petur, let's say you're in a place where you don't have partition. You want to make Mechesot for Reshut HaYachid. You don't have to use walls. You use bushes too. People don't realize this. The bushes, the trees, they can be good Mechesot for Reshut HaYachid. Big, heavy garbage cans, you can set them up before Shabbat and make a Reshut HaYachid. Another Reshut HaYachid, by the way, is also a Haritz. Haritz is a ditch. If the ditch is 4 by 4 and the depth is 10, right? So we have the opposite. Instead of it being high above the ground, it's below the ground. That's called a Reshut HaYachid. You can't stick something from the street. A mound, like a little hill in the street. That's called tel. Tel HaMitlaket. Tel HaMitlaket, if it slopes 25 degrees, it's high, at least 10 tefachim. And it reaches that height within Dalet Amot of slope, which is about 6 to 8 feet. Or in degrees, it's about a 25 degree slant. The top of that little hill or mound in the street is called a Reshut HaYachid. Mountains are mechitzot. They're not man-made, but they're considered mechitzot. So, depending on the slope, the steeper it is, the better. On top of it, we call it a Reshut HaYachid. Even though it's in the Reshut HaRabim, the big pile of something, the big mound, if it meets those dimensions that I just said, it would be called a Reshut HaRabim. We won't be able to take from that spot. Okay, let's go back to the other point of Rabbi Reshut HaRabim Me'al HaSarah. So we spoke a little bit about Carmelit, we spoke about Reshut HaRabim and Reshut HaYachid. I'm going to get into Makom Petur now. Makom Petur, anything above 10 tefachim in the air, when we are traveling by plane, by helicopter, above 10 tefachim, we are in Makom Petur. Why is that important to note that anything above 10 tefachim? Because imagine, this is a little funny, you shouldn't do it anyway. Let's say you saw something sticky on the ground. Sticky, you threw it on a wall, and it can stick to the wall above 10 tefachim. You're okay. Why? Because that area above 10 tefachim is a Makom Petur. Now what's a Makom Petur? Makom Petur means it's okay. It's Petur. It's okay to put something there from Reshut HaRabim to there, from there to Reshut HaRabim, or from Reshut HaYachid to there, or from there to Reshut HaYachid. You cannot, however, take from Reshut HaYachid to Makom Petur and then from Makom Petur to Reshut HaRabim. The rabbi said that this particular spot, which is not a Carmelit, not a Reshut HaRabim, not a Reshut, it's called a Makom Petur, which means it's not a premise, a real premise. It doesn't have its own Reshut, and therefore you're allowed to place something there from the Reshut HaRabim, or from there to the Reshut HaRabim, or from Reshut HaYachid to the Makom Petur, or from the Makom Petur to the Reshut HaYachid. Give you an example. You know what's a typical Makom Petur? You know those mailboxes that people sometimes have in front of the house, like a little box and a little stand? Does that have a special mystique? A lot of people have it. Their possession of like a birdhouse. That's a Makom Petur. Why? It's not Dalet al Dalet. It's not 4 by 4. It obviously does not have mechizot. All it is a pole. And it's above. Well, even if it's not above, but as long as it has no Dalet al Dalet, it's not a Carmelit. What is it? I think I wrote it here. Let me see if it's going to be here on this side or on this side. I'm jumping around a little bit now. Examples of Makom Petur: fire hydrant. Fire hydrant. At least it's more than 3 tefachim high from the ground. It's not Arba al Arba. It's not a Carmelit. Definitely not a Reshut HaYachid. Has no mechitzot. That's called Makom Petur. It's important to know, because you would be able to, if you're in the street, you'd be able to stop and put something down on it, in case you forgot something in your pocket. You would be able to put something down in a Makom Petur. You would be able to take a key that's in a Makom Petur to open your house. Right? You just can't leave your key hidden anywhere. If that place where you're hiding it is a Reshut HaRabim. So you have to be familiar with what Makom Petur is. So if you have a Makom Petur, it's able to assist you in various situations. So fire hydrant is a Makom Petur. Amud telephone, the big telephone post, yeah. Anybody know what madhan is? That's a modern Hebrew word for parking. The parking meter, Makom Petur, right? It's not low, so it's not part of the street. It's not Arba al Arba, it's not a Carmelit. It's above 3. It's a Makom Petur. Now the 4 by 4, if it was above 10, stop being a Carmelit too. Since it has no mechizot, it has to be something else. What is it? It's a Makom Petur. So there's a lot of situations that you might see if they don't have mechitzot, partitions, and they're not 4 by 4, and they're between 3 and 10, or even more than 10. If it's like a pillar, a post, a pole, it would be a makom patur. Or a ditch which does not have the dimensions of a karmelit, of a shutei yachid. Does not have the 4 by 4, but it is that little hole, that little ditch within the makom patur. Okay, examples of karmelit. I'm going to go back to this. What's an example of karmelit? So we spoke about oceans and rivers, and any rural area, zor kafri, anything which is rural, usually there's no 600,000, there's no big amounts of people. That's called karmelit. But here's an example that's going to surprise you. And again, this is it's complex, and I have to give details next week. I'm going to just give you the name of it. It's called gag. A roof. Not any kind of roof. There's all types of roofs. But for this halakha, there's mainly 2 types. One gag, one roof, which is either flat or slanted, where the walls reach the roof. The roof does not extend over the walls of the house. Let's say you're standing on the roof. Are you allowed to carry? This is your house, you might think. This is a shutei yachid. Well, guess what? That roof may or may not be a shutei yachid depending on if it extends, if the roof extends beyond the walls or not. If they do not extend, if they're flat, if they reach the edge, like some walls and roofs do, then we make believe that the walls continue higher. And your roof is a shutei yachid just like the rest of the house. You're allowed to take things up the roof, you're allowed to take things down from the roof. If that roof, this is the Rabbanan, by the way, not Midrash, if the roof extends beyond the wall, then you cannot carry on the roof. You would not be able to carry on the roof. It would be called a karmelit. But that's a unique example of karmelit because it depends on does the roof extend itself beyond the walls or not. Here in Ilchot Eruvin, you should know there's a lot of information. I don't think I'm going to give you everything because I don't think you have to become experts in all of this. But just a few examples so you could see or better understand the various types of reshuyot and what the problems are. So we gave various examples of the various reshuyot. Now I'm just going to talk a little bit about what the rabbis prohibited. In addition to all these reshuyot, they said a few more things. And basically, it covers these 5 items, 4. Any 3 mechitzot, which may be kashem midoraita, 3 partitions, which may be a shutei yachid, nevertheless, because it appears, it looks like it's open to the street, there's no 4th wall, you're not allowed to carry in that little area. Let's say it's a porch with no cover on top. Porch that has a cover on top is a big advantage. We'll see next week why. But 3, you have a sukkah, well, not sukkah, you have 3 walls. You have that sometimes in the street, right? You have 3 walls that are formed because of the stores, and there's no 4th wall on the side of the street. You would not be able to carry within those 3 walls unless you make a tikkun on the 4th wall. Alright? That's called givul mechitzot b'li tikkun. That's midrabanan. So even though you have 3, midrabanan you need a tikkun on the 4th side. Then there's something called karfas. Karfas is an enclosed area. It's enclosed, it has fences, but it's made with 2 plants, large farms. If it's larger than a Beit Safraim, Beit Safraim is about the size of about 1/3 of an acre, a little bit more than 1/3 of an acre, a little bit more than 70 amot by 70 amot, a little bit about 135, 140 feet by 100. This large area, or larger. If it's not made, if it's not made to be inhabited, it's a plant, because it resembles a large uninhabited area, the rabbi said you cannot carry into it or from it. Even though it's enclosed with a fence, because it's a large area which is not inhabited, or it's not like a place of a dwelling, the Rabbanan asru to carry it in a place like that. This is also important when you happen to be living in a kibbutz, perhaps, close to a yeshuv, where they have a lot of these types of places. In a city, this is not too common, but you may have large areas that are used to plants that are not made to be part of a house. Because we may have a large garden, but it's part of the house. That's very different. So it depends on what is used. The 3rd and 4th example are very, very important. We're going to be spending quite a bit of time on that because that is very, very common. It's called in Hebrew cheder meshutaf or cheder madrigot. Not cheder meshutaf, chaser meshutaf. Chaser meshutaf means let's say you have 2 homes, a duplex, sharing 2 families sharing the same backyard. 2 or more families sharing the same backyard. Or the next example, cheder madrigot, which is very typical in New York, and several families living in the same building sharing what's called in English common area. The common area, the stairs, condominium, the lobby, all of that is meshutaf, misderon, right? That's common area. And even though it's enclosed with mechitzot, it's part of the house, it's part of the building. The Chachamim said you cannot carry from your house to the lobby. Wait a minute. Wait till I finish the sentence because it's not exactly the code until I finish. You cannot carry into the lobby or into the backyard or from the backyard into the house unless you make something called eruv katzerot. So all Jewish people
who know about this halakha, who live in New York, in Israel, with a lot of apartment buildings, much more here in Los Angeles. They should be familiar with this halakha. Because if you want to carry your stroller down there, you want your lobby, your common area, in your backyard, it's not yours. It belongs to other people as well. The Chachamim said, since this belongs to many families, not to one, it gives the appearance of close to Reshut Rabim. So people may confuse this, carry into Reshut Rabim. So this is Midrabanan, but this does not mean you can't do anything. You can fix this very easily, much more easily than with making a big eruv in it. By making something called eruv chaserot. It's an eruv between courtyards, between families. It can be done once and very easily and taken care of. And that's what everybody does in this situation. You don't have this problem in a hotel when you go to for a weekend. You do, and I'll tell you why next week. But you do have it when you live in a place. You're not just there temporarily. And there are other people who live and own, right, homes in that same courtyard. So this is applicable to situations where, there are places, in Mexico they have them where people build together. Like a large compound, they have a swimming pool, a tennis court, and have 10 homes around. I think they have it in Palm Springs too. Compounds, large areas, small little communities of 10 homes. They all share the swimming pool, a large area of grass, and it's all enclosed with a fence. You say, okay, it's all enclosed, I can carry. It's like one big house. No. Because several families own and use their homes, that whole common area requires an eruv. We're not talking about a regular eruv because it's all enclosed. It has something better than an eruv. It has partitions, but it requires something called eruv chaserot. So this is midrabanan. Midoraita, according to the Torah, there's no problem with Reshut Yachid, right? It's enclosed. Midrabanan, because it resembles a Reshut Rabim, because it's used by various families, it's chaser meshutaf, the rabbis required a tikkun of sorts, something to remind us that this is not, and that tikkun is called eruv chaserot, which is a different type of eruv. It's done with food. Right, exactly. So that is Hashem we'll talk about more next week because this is quite relevant, and there's quite a few details here. I just wanted to give you the introduction to familiarize ourselves with the various concepts, the various reshuyot, some examples of what this is and what the melacha is all about, the hota'ah, the avara. But as far as the details, what do you do if you carry it by mistake? What do you do if it's stuck? How to best, let's say you find tefillin in the street. What do you do now? Find tefillin in the street. Even there, you can't carry them. What do you do? Can you put them on? We'll talk about that next time.